Genesis 41 and 42. Great scriptures. What an incredible story. I love being immersed in a story, and I feel like Joseph and the second kind of latter part of Genesis is just a great story. It's storytelling. So we saw Joseph left in the prison and forgotten by the cupbearer and the baker. And now 2 years later, we hear about him stepping in again with that same skill set that he's already exercised. It's so important that we begin to step into our giftings, because Joseph is identified because of the memory of this gifting that he shared with someone else. And our giftings are supposed to serve people. And this wisdom, interpretation, knowledge gift that Joseph has, because he was faithful to share it with the baker and the cupbearer, because he was faithful really with the little, now he's going to get a big opportunity to share it. And so it's so important that we step out and share our giftings. But in Genesis 41, we have this story of him interpreting Pharaoh's dream. And I think just the main thing that stood out to me from all of this is that he gives a load of information, knowledge about what the dream means. But the final layer that he adds to that is a layer of wisdom, which is about the interpretation, the actual application of that knowledge. It's not just what we know, it's what we do with what we know. That's what wisdom is. And it just strikes me that probably Pharaoh was surrounded by very knowledgeable people with facts, people with answers, doctors and politicians and all kinds of thinkers. He would have been surrounded by people offering interpretation to the dream. But Joseph goes a step further and doesn't just interpret the dream, but also then adds application to the interpretation to say, this is what the dream means and this is what you need to do. And it's that wisdom that marks him out. And even in verse 38, Pharaoh said, can we find someone like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh equates wisdom with godliness and the Spirit of God and the presence of God. He can identify something different about Joseph because he didn't just say what he knew. He actually gave wisdom and advice and counsel on how to respond to what he knows. And it just sounds like God. It sounds like God to people. Wisdom sounds like God to people. And if we can cultivate wisdom in our lives and speak wisdom in the right circumstances, then people are more likely to hear and encounter God through what we say. And then in Genesis 42, we have this story of the brothers who are also in famine where they are, being sent to Egypt to go and beg of Pharaoh's man, who we know is their brother. They don't know that. And there's quite an emotional undertone to this whole chapter, I think. Sometimes we don't get to hear the emotion of characters, and we've talked about that before. In Genesis, sometimes there is almost a seeming lack of emotion because that's not really what it's about. It's not about accessing somebody's feelings. It's about observing somebody's obedience. But in this story, we do get to see some emotion. We get to feel the emotions of the brothers who have matured and grown since everything went down with Joseph and are kind of clearly laden with some guilt about what happened. We get to see the emotions of Joseph, who is moved as his brothers speak about what's happened and turns aside and weeps. There's something quite rich, I think, in this chapter of humanity and human feeling. But I love in verse 18, it says, on the third day, Joseph said to them, do what I say and you will live, because I fear God. I think that's just such a standout marker of leadership, is we need to look for leaders who fear God, not only know God or even personally follow God, but have a convicting fear of God that guides what they do, what they say yes and no to. That's the kind of leadership our world needs. That's the kind of leadership our churches need, is a leadership that is rightly held in place by the fear of God. And so we see the beginning part of this story that we'll finish up tomorrow, but a story of reuniting a family. And it's interesting that this family is reunited and healed in a time of famine, in a time of lack. We so often think that when we have money in the bank, food in the cupboards, all of our prayers answered, that's when life is going to be at its best. But sometimes God will use lack to draw us together or to push us towards what we need next, to push us towards breakthrough, to push us towards faith. So this family is united in this moment of lack, and we're going to see that tomorrow. But as it stands, Jacob, or Israel, he's reluctant to let Benjamin go and join the brothers because he already knows the heartache of losing a son and he doesn't want to risk it a second time. And I think, again, there's just such a humanity and a depth of feeling to that he's still a heartbroken man and it's affected everything. And it would, of course it would, but sometimes I think we strip our Bible characters of some of that humanity because they're words on a page. And actually, they're all trying to figure something out. I'm just impacted again by the brokenness of the people that God uses to teach us lessons. And this is a man walking through fear and heartache and the desire to not lose again. So amazing scriptures, very beautifully kind of descriptive scriptures that we have today. But the thing I'll just finish with that I'm reminded of is at the end of 41, when Joseph steps in and rises to power and he's given a new robe. He's given this robe of authority. He had a robe at the beginning of his life. It was taken from him, but it marked him out. And he waited and waited, and God gave to him a new robe, put a ring on his finger. It kind of reminds me of like the prodigal son story, but he's embraced into a new position and a new authority, and a kind of a new family, I suppose, in the palace. But he's given this robe, and it reminds me that God always, when something is lost, God will always return it to us, and he'll usually return it to us better than we had it in the first place. So great scriptures today, and we'll come and see how the story ends tomorrow.